Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Thomas Bowles. I'm one of the ag agents here in Prince William County. Welcome to this edition of our farmer series on maintaining home flocks. Today we have two professors from Virginia Tech's Animal and Poultry Science Department, Dr. Mike Persia and Dr. Leonie Jacobs. Leonie, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right, sure. So today we'll talk about several components related to the health of a home flock. And those include food and leg health, small and large critters. So I'll talk a little bit about predation and ectoparasites or external parasites. And then my colleague, Mike Persia, will talk about biosecurity, and that will tie into a lot of the things I'll talk about too, because biosecurity is key to keep the health of your flock at a good level. So most foot and leg health issues can originate from a range of issues related to nutrition or management or the genetics of the bird. So it can be a little hard to pinpoint what the issue is. I'll talk about some mostly management related topics today. So not so much the genetics of the birds or nutrition, but I do want to say today we do have a nutritionist in our midst, Mike Persia. So if you have any questions about the nutrition of your flock, he's your guy. So one of the probably most common food health issues that you can encounter in your backyard flock is foot pad dermatitis, and sometimes called pododermatitis. And this refers to lesions on the foot pads and or toes of the chickens. And these lesions are characterized by black necrotic skin and inflammation. So you can see in the picture on the top, there's sort of a range or a scale of how you can categorize these foot pad lesions, where you see the score 0, which is a perfectly healthy foot pad. So the skin should be yellow, depending on the genetic strain, but in this case, yellow and soft. And you can see on the far right where lesions are very severe. So they spread throughout the toes, and the lesion can either be very shallow but large or deep. The black skin is necrotic skin. So this is where cell death has occurs. And this necrosis of the skin is often predecessed. So before necrosis, you may see hyperkeratosis. So this is thickening of the outer layer of skin. So the first sign foot pad dermatitis occurs may be that you can see that the skin on the bottom of the feet is thickening a little bit. And if foot pad dermatitis becomes severe or softens the skin or causes open lesions, it can be a source of secondary infection. And that is when bumblefoot can occur. So bumblefoot is a condition that you see on the picture on the right here. So you can see a very big swollen foot pad, and this can be very painful for these birds. Bumblefoot is often caused by Staphylococcus bacteria. And it's it's important to know that these bacteria are very normal to have in the environments they live in and on chickens, which is part of their normal bacterial flora, I guess. So it's only a problem when a barrier like the skin is broken or open and these bacteria can enter the bloodstream. So that would be the case here with bumblefoot. So some ways to treat these foot lesions is by making some management changes. So even if lesions have already occurred, you can look at your litter quality or maybe separate the birds that have severe lesions and put them on some very dry and soft litter, making sure that there's no injury to the foot or the feet, and the skin doesn't soften any further, potentially causing this secondary infection. Another way is to gently clean and wrap the lesion, but gentle is the key word here, because if you wrap the feet too tightly, you may have a blood flow issue. So make sure that the wrapping is very gentle, the cleaning is gentle so that you don't open the lesion and again, potentially risk secondary infection. If it's really severe, either on individual birds or maybe throughout your flock, it could be valuable to consult your veterinarian, and they may have a good plan on how to treat the flock. For instance, with bumblefoot, as I said, it's a bacterial issue, so you can use antibiotics, but these localized infections are often not as responsive to antibiotics as more general infections are, so it may not be the best way forward. And what I wouldn't like to see is any DIY surgery. I saw on YouTube that there are some videos on there where backyard flock owners remove bumblefoot themselves, or maybe remove the lesion related to footbed dermatitis. And I would highly advise against it. This is a surgery that you then apply to an animal that is fully conscious and doesn't have any pain relief. So this is really stressful and painful to the animal. Also, it can then be another risk for secondary infection because you have an open lesion or an open wound. And what some people don't consider is that chickens are prey species, so they won't show that they're in pain unless they can no longer hide it. So in some of these videos, it may seem that the chickens are okay, they're not responding, but they're just not responding because of that sort of prey type behavior. So leave the surgeries to the veterinarian if that's needed. What is even a better approach may be preventing foot health issues. So the key for foot health or good foot health is ensuring good litter or bedding management. And then the ultimate goal is to have dry, friable litter. So making sure it's not wet. And there are many factors that impact litter quality, including the litter or bedding type. So the best type of litter or bedding is something that absorbs moisture and has a small particle size so that moisture is absorbed quickly and also evaporates quickly. Consider what type of drinker system you use. It depends if you just have buckets of water, for instance, that there may be some leakage or spilling when birds drink. If you have a more sophisticated nipple drinker system, look at whether they leak, how much water pressure is there, the quality of the water. If there's loads of biofilm or debris in the water, it may cause leaking. Also consider birds' feet, their feet. So the type of feed or nutritional ingredients in the feed can impact the quality of the feces of the birds, and that in turn impacts the litter or bedding quality. So for instance, feed that is very high in soybean meal will result in more viscous feces that is more likely to stick to the foot pads of the birds. And with that wet feces stuck on the feet will get softer, they're more longer exposed to the irritants in the fecal material. So this is another factor to consider when considering litter management. Something you can probably control a little less in a backyard flock than, for instance, in a commercial setting is the temperature, humidity, and ventilation. But it does play a key role in what the litter looks like or how the litter looks like. Especially ventilation is important to ensure that the moisture is taken out of the litter. So if you do have control, try to make sure to keep humidity between 50 and 70% if you can, and then ventilate the house appropriately, or the coop. And then the last factor that can impact litter quality is stocking density. So how many birds do you have in a space? Because if you have relatively high stocking density, so more birds in a coop than may be ideal, then it's harder to get rid of that moisture in the litter just because there's more defecation, more fecal material in there. So moving on to another foot and leg health issue, and that's lameness. Unfortunately, there are numerous reasons that a bird can become lame, and a range of potential causes. Some can be related to nutrition, they can be related to bacteria or viruses. So it's really hard to pinpoint why your bird is lame once it occurs. But here is I will just list a few reasons. If you're interested in learning a little more about causes of lameness and more details about how these causes cause lameness, then I recommend you to take a look at the source that's shown in the bottom, and I'll show it towards the end too. So two potential viral causes or conditions that are associated with lameness are viral arthritis and Marek's disease. So viral arthritis will often show with swollen hocks. So those are sort of the knee joints of chickens. So if you see swelling there and lameness, it could be a sign that it's because of viral arthritis. Marek's disease can show through lameness, but also partial paralysis, and the birds may show sickness behavior. So they may hunch a little, they'll be less active, they may ruffle their feathers. So those can be indicators that it might be Marek's disease. You can vaccinate your flock for Marek's disease, but this has to be done very early in life. So once the flock is already established, it's too late to vaccinate. Some bacterial causes are Staphylococcus. So I just talked about Staphylococcus and how it can result in bumblefoot if it enters through the skin. Bumblefoot is very painful, and birds will start showing lameness or show an awkward gait because of it. Another bacterial cause can be Pasteurella. This is associated with swellings in the face or in the comb, and you may see reduced growth and reduced egg production. So those can be indicators that you may have a bacterial issue on your hand. And then there's some nutritional causes. There could be rickets. You will see lame birds, but maybe their beak is also a little soft, so bones are more soft. Or cage layer fatigue, which is more of a commercial, maybe a risk factor, which shows with birds being paralyzed. So they may be very alert and seem fine that way, but they're paralyzed, so they won't be able to reach feed and water. So just a brief, summary and list of some best practices to ensure foot and leg health in your flock. That is to keep litter or bedding dry, especially for good foot health. Regularly check for leg issues and lesions. It may be even worth it to keep some records. Check your birds every 3 months or every 6 months and see if you see any lesions and how they develop. Do you see lesions becoming more severe, or does it stay stable? And that can help you make decisions on what the next step is. If it becomes really severe, you could separate the bird and make sure it can reach food and water. But if that doesn't help, you can consult a veterinarian or call or euthanize the bird, because if it's lame and has difficulty accessing food and water, it's probably in pain depending on the cause of the lameness or the lesions. So it's probably most humane to euthanize the bird if there's no other solutions. Moving on to a different topic, focusing on small and large critters and how you can protect the health of your flock from predation and from ectoparasites. So first, I will talk about large critters or predators. And predation is really a risk that can occur in small flocks and large flocks, but especially in free-range flocks. Commercial flocks that are housed indoors only are protected from predation. So it's one of the reasons why commercial farmers went to the indoors, is to keep disease and predators out. Predators mostly attack in the evening or in the early morning, but there are some daytime predators to keep an eye out for. And those are cats, dogs, birds of prey, and snakes. Cats and snakes especially are a risk for predation when birds are small or if you have eggs laying around. These can be both pets, cats and dogs, or feral. So it's best to try to keep them away. But as I said, most predation occurs at night. So here's a list of some of the predators that could show an interest in your flock, including rats, raccoons, skunks, possums, foxes, owls, weasels, bobcats, coyotes, and even bears may be interested in visiting your flock. So there are three ways to identify the predator. And one way to identify the predator is to look at the murder scene. So after there has been an attack, you can determine by how the attack took place what is the likely predator is. So for instance, if you see missing adult birds, so birds are gone, this could be due to a range of predators listed here. Often domestic dogs will not eat the bird. So maybe if it's a domestic dog, the bird can be found close to the coop or the pen, so close to the sites where it was attacked. You may find some feathers laying around or some pieces of chicken here and there, and that could be after a dog, coyote, or fox attacks your flock. For bobcats, they typically hunt at dawn and dusk, but they are active throughout the day and night, so it could be at any time really. If you have any missing eggs or chicks, so small birds, this could basically be caused by any predator. When these are predated on or gone, then you often don't really see any sign of disturbance, especially if it happens at night. Eggs are a very easy target, obviously, to a range of predators, and they may also predate during the day, like blue jays or crows may find an egg a nice snack. If you have birds in your flock that are missing their heads, this is most likely due to birds of prey or raccoons. This often occurs when birds are housed in a pen or a coop with loose meshing. So birds of prey can maybe scare some birds and cause them to jump up or fly up. And if their head then protrudes or comes close to the mesh, the birds of prey will eat the heads. And raccoons may reach through the mesh from the side or the top, depending on how your coop is set up, and will rip off the bird's head through the mesh or wire caging. And I think actually that's what occurred with one of my research flocks last spring. If your birds are missing any limbs, it's most likely due to raccoons. they are very good with their hands and also quite intelligent. So they'll find ways to maybe pull a leg through the mesh if they can, and will only eat the leg, for instance. If you find dead birds that have lacerations or lesions near their vents or cloaca, this could be due to weasels or mink or opossums, but it could also be due to other chickens, and that's not predation per se, it's more cannibalism related to vent pecking. And if this occurs, that's an issue with the housing. So vent pecking can occur when birds are triggered by the opening of the vents when another bird lays an egg. So they see that sort of shiny skin and maybe the pink skin, and they will start pecking. And if other birds come close, they will peck more until there's a large lesion there, which can cause or result in cannibalism and death. So it's not really predation, but it comes close. If you find dead injured birds with other injuries, so not near the cloaca but elsewhere, it could be due to weasels or mink. They may just pull out the intestines and eat those rather than consuming the rest of the birds. And also skunks and opossums may kill very messily, so they'll damage the body, eat some, like the intestines, and leave the rest. Then the last sort of identification is if you find dead intact birds. I said already earlier that dogs may kill a bird but not eat it. Another reason to find dead intact birds in your coop or pen may be due to piling. So if there's a predator or any other scare in the area that will frighten your flock, they may run through a corner in the pen or in the coop and pile on top of each other. And just from that weight alone of other birds piling on top of other birds, this can result in quite some mortality in flocks, depending on how frightened they were. So if the murder scene doesn't give you any information, game or wildlife cameras can be really helpful in identifying predators. Nowadays, they're relatively affordable. You can get them for like $40, and they're active, or they're triggered by activity, so that will help you spot any predators that come lurking around your flock at night. If that doesn't work, or they're not available, you can also look for tracks. So tracks may be a good identifier for what predator was roaming around your coop. And if you're feeling really adventurous, you can even try to determine the species based on their fecal matter that they left behind. So many ways to try and pinpoint which predator is around your flock and is threatening the health of your flock. The best way to ensure your birds are healthy and safe is to prevent predation. And one way to prevent that is to keep birds inside. So as I said, commercial flocks are often kept indoors, in part to prevent predation. But I do understand that with your backyard flock, that's not really a nice option. You may want to see them roaming around in your yard, and it does look nice. So that may be the last option if it's really hard to keep predators away. Then the next best thing is to provide them with a fence or an enclosed run. And I would recommend including some overhead cover to avoid those climbing predators like raccoons being able to come in over the fence. Some ways to make sure that your fence is extra sturdy is to bury the wire and or include a skirt. So the skirt is shown in the picture here on the right. And that can prevent digging of predators underneath the fence. Another very effective way to protect your flock is to provide electric fencing, but this may not be feasible for everyone. Especially for predators during the day, it can be really useful to provide cover for the chickens. So if there is a bird of prey flying over, some types of shelters in the run or in wherever they're ranging and in the backyard can make sure that birds can hide from the predator or escape the predator. So that could be a nice way to keep predation away during the day. You could use owl or coyote decoys, although the efficacy may not be for the long term, so you may have to move them around and maybe get some different ones to make sure that they stay effective. Try to remove debris or areas around your flock that may be good spaces for them to hide or nest in. And also lock up any attractants. So bird feed will attract all kinds of animals, waste, including feces. Make sure that you clean those out often. And of course, eggs will attract a range of predators. And then maybe the most fun way to prevent predation is using or considering to use a guard animal. Guard alpacas can be used, or even guard geese can be effective, especially during the day. If you are considering to trap or kill a predator, please check your local Fish and Wildlife resources, because there are some rules and regulations about what you can and cannot kill. So make sure to check that before you attempt it. So just to summarize some best practices related to the predation, prevention of predation obviously is the key here. Try to avoid access to your flock by providing your flock with a fence or a run. Try to protect your flock by maybe using a guard animal or giving the flock places to hide or escape predators if they are visiting. And try to make the environment less attractive for predators. So make sure feed is not accessible, get rid of any debris, and make sure to collect eggs regularly. My final topic, but not the final topic of today, is on small critters, so ectoparasites. Again, a key component to making sure your flock is healthy is to ensure that they are parasite-free. Today, I will focus on ectoparasites, so external parasites, not the ones that can be in the intestines, for instance. So here's a list of the most common ectoparasites that were found in flocks in California. There's really not a lot of research about how common ectoparasites are in backyard flocks. So it's hard to find numbers, but this study from 2016 found these ectoparasites in the flocks. They studied 20 backyard flocks, and in 16 of those flocks, there was one or more ectoparasite present. I will go briefly over a few of those, but not all of these. So first of all, northern Phalamides. These are quite common ectoparasites in the US. And you can see on these pictures here, the mites are sort of the black coloring in the feathers, on the feathers of the birds. So infestation with northern Phalamides can come from equipment, from people, and from other poultry, but also from wild birds. So this is especially a risk factor in backyard flocks. The studies have found that starlings and house sparrows can carry these mites and also transmit them or transfer them. The birds spend their, the mites spend their whole life on the skin of the host, so on the skin of the bird, and they feed on the blood of the birds. So this means that the eggs and the nymphs and all the life stages are present on the skin and in the feathers, including the excrements and the skins. So if the infestation is severe, you can probably clearly see it present. These mites mainly aggregate near the vent or the cloaca of the birds. So this is a good place to check whether you have an infestation. Problem with these ectoparasites is that they can live for weeks without a host. So if you have a few flocks coming in after each other, or just a flock in your backyard for a long time, it's really hard to get rid of them once the population is established. And some indicators, but also consequences of these infestations are reduced egg production. You'll see more feed intake in your birds. In severe infestations, birds may get anemic, and the birds experience discomfort. So you'll see a lot of preening, restlessness, and maybe a little bit more aggression when birds are infested with these mites. Moving on to another common ectoparasite in the US, and that's the red chicken mite. These mites are a little different than northern fowl mites, but infestation can originate from almost the same sources. So infestation can come from rodents, so another reason to keep rats away from your flock, from equipment, and people can carry them or on their clothing. What's different with this type of mite is that they live in an environment, so not on the host, but in the area that the host lives in. And they will only access the birds at night to feed from their blood. They have a very short life cycle, and that can be a problem because the population can grow quickly. These mites will also feed on human blood. So if you get them on you, they may start biting you and feeding from your blood. And this can cause a skin irritation, itching, and allergic reactions even, besides just general discomfort. Some signs that you may have a red chicken mite infestation is again that egg production and egg quality are reduced. So you may see some blood spots on your eggs, the eggshells may be thinner, and you see fewer eggs. Birds will eat more. You may have more mortality, so birds may die from anemia in this case. And again, birds will show discomfort. So they'll ruffle their feathers, they'll preen a lot. There may be some more irritation within your flock towards each other. So those can be signs that you may have an ectoparasite issue. Then another type of mite are the scaly leg knights. And these mites burrow into the skin of legs and feet. So on this picture, you can see a bird, and you can see that the skin looks very sort of thick, callousy, hardened. And that is because there's a scaly leg mite infection or infestation. So all life stages of these mites remain on the bird, so on the skin, and they will feed on the skin. And transmission only goes from bird to bird. So there's no transmission via humans or rodents or anything. It's really birds through bird contact. These mites are, unfortunately, I think, not visible to the naked eye, so you won't see them besides the legs that you can see in the picture where you can see that there's an issue. And because they burrow under the skin, there's a risk for secondary infections, just like with foot bed dermatitis, that sort of protective barrier of the skin is compromised and bacteria and other type of pathogens can then enter the bloodstream. I wanted to highlight some treatments or potential treatments for these mites separately because they are so different from the other ectoparasites. It could be helpful or useful to dip or cover the legs in Vaseline or petroleum jelly or coconut oil or some other oils to sort of suffocate the mite. So this can be effective. There's also medication that can be effective against these mites, but they do have to be prescribed by a veterinarian. So visit your veterinarian if you have this issue and the dipping or the rubbing with Vaseline doesn't work. Do recommend you to not cut off or rub or pick off any scales or skin because one, it's very painful, and two, it can cause damage. Again, be another risk for secondary infection. So leave the feet as is and try the other methods first and only. The final ectoparasite that I wanted to briefly go over are bed bugs, and these are probably also the worst because they're also common or relatively common in human establishments or houses. I think my association with bed bugs is with shady hotels. So they don't only occur in shady hotels, they can also be present in your flock. These bed bugs find their host through CO2, so from just breathing, they can detect where we are from about a 5-foot distance. And similar as with red chicken mites, they will access the host at night to feed from the bloods. They can be found in the environment, like on equipment. They will hide in cracks and crevices, so they're really hard to get rid of. And this picture on the right, you see sort of all kinds of bugs present in a poultry facility. These bed bugs can survive without food for more than 2 months. So again, it's really hard to get rid of them. Just getting rid of the flock or leaving the area open for a while, having some downtime may not be enough to get rid of them. And what is really, I think, a potential issue is that if the conditions are optimal for bed bugs, the population can double every 2 weeks. So it can become a problem really quickly. And as you probably know, these bugs will feed on people, so you can bring them into your home if you're unlucky. So another reason to make sure that you prevent and treat these infestations early. So here are some ways listed to treat external parasites, infestations. There are some chemical methods and non-chemical methods on the next slides. So the issue with chemical methods is that the bugs can build resistance to products, so you have to rotate and make sure you apply it according to the label. And it can also be toxic to humans and other animals, so it may not be the preferred method to get rid of an infestation. Some examples of different type of chemical methods are pyrethroids, but especially these are at risk for resistance, or there's already quite some resistance out there. Organophosphates can be a good chemical to treat for infestation. Silicates have seen to be effective, but they also carry or have some risk for people, especially inhaling silica can be an issue. And there are some essential oils that can also help in treating external parasites, but definitely not all of them. So if you're considering essential oils, do your research. Some non-chemical methods to get rid of parasite is to make sure any new bird that comes into the flock is parasite free. So check them, check the feathers, check the skin, keep them separate from the flock for a while to make sure that they are really free of parasites. More of a preventative, perhaps, is to regularly clean and maintain good hygiene. So just keep the area clean and free of parasites. You can physically remove parasites by just using a high pressure washer or even vacuuming them up, but you can understand that there are some issues with that because it's really hard to reach in those small cracks and crevices, especially if your coop is made of wood. It can be hard to reach them. You can consider placing traps, at least to monitor whether an infestation is occurring. So check them regularly, and there's a range of sort of DIY traps you can make and also traps you can buy to make sure that infestations aren't too severe. And the final non-chemical methods you could apply is heat or cold. And I know that's probably not very practical in a backyard flock, but just so you know, as an example, bed bugs will die if they're exposed to 122 Fahrenheit for 4 hours or -4 Fahrenheit for 2 days. So extreme heat and extreme cold can kill these ectoparasites, but yeah, the practicality of this method may not be there. And I think it's pretty clear that the best treatment here is prevention, so trying to prevent infestation. And one way to do that is to ensure an appropriate level of biosecurity. And my colleague, Mike Persia, will talk about biosecurity after this. So this is a nice segue. But before I give him the floor, I want to put in a shameless plug for our Poultry Welfare Extension website. This was set up last year, and the goal of this website is to translate science related to poultry welfare and make it more accessible to a wider audience. So we write monthly newsletters, blog posts, and post videos related to poultry welfare, poultry health. Some of them are maybe more targeted to larger industry stakeholders, but some, and I think most of them, are relevant for backyard flock people too. So I hope you visit the website, and you can also reach out to me. I included some websites that I thought that could be valuable, but I don't know if these slides are going to be shared or not, but here they are. If you're interested in reading more on any of these topics, I think these are good places to start. So I thank you, and we'll give the floor to my colleague to talk all about biosecurity.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. Really appreciated your presentation, and I think it was a good transition. And that's really going to be the heart of my presentation right now is really talking about biosecurity. What is it? Why is it important? And how can we do that from a small scale or backyard production standpoint? Because this is something that the large scale poultry industry certainly utilizes, but I think everyone can use a refresher course on this and better understanding, and really just a reminder. Honestly, we get busy in our day-to-day lives, and it's very easy to skip over a biosecurity step. And if we do that, we are putting our birds and ourselves at a higher level of risk. So I wanted to start off this presentation really by defining what is biosecurity, or what can biosecurity do. So biosecurity really addresses measures that should be taken to keep any diseases from a flock. So in essence, what we're talking about here is protecting your poultry from diseases coming into it. It's sort of like putting up a barrier, putting up some walls. Microbes can go through walls, so they're not really necessarily physical walls, but putting up some barriers that will help reduce the level of risk that these birds are exposed to on a day-to-day basis. But additionally, biosecurity will actually help reduce the transmission of diseases from possibly your flock, if it's infected, to your neighbor's flocks. So it's also practicing good stewardship, making sure that you don't go from your farm where you might have a disease issue and walk onto your neighbor's farm or your neighbor's yard where your neighbor's birds are and transmit that disease. So not only does it help protect your flock, but it also helps protect any poultry that are around you or that you might potentially visit. And then the third part that I don't think a lot of people necessarily think about, but it does promote human health by the reduction of zoonotic pathogens. The zoonotic pathogens are just pathogens that can pass from animals, birds in this case, to humans. Probably one of the most talked about pathogens from this standpoint, especially when we start talking about backyard flocks, is Salmonella. I know the CDC has released a lot of information here recently about Salmonella coming from chicks that are coming from hatcheries and being shipped across the U.S. to different places. And I think biosecurity can help, or some simple biosecurity practices can help promote human health as well. Certainly when we start talking about washing and cleaning up after you've interacted with actually before and after you've interacted with these poultry species. So who needs it? And I have listed here on the left a very large commercial producer. In the middle, I have a small producer, and on the right, I have sort of backyard poultry. Well, really, when we think about biosecurity, everyone needs biosecurity. Like I said before, it's something that is very easy to forget and to not keep up your guard for biosecurity, but it will help limit the risk associated with having poultry and what those poultry are exposed to. So I've cut this presentation down a little bit just from a timing standpoint. I usually talk about sort of a three-way triangle, and that talks about a susceptible host. It talks about the pathogens being able to access that host, and then favorable conditions. So I want to just focus on more of the biosecurity aspects of this at this point. So let's talk about a favorable environment for pathogens. Pathogens require moisture. If we go back to Dr. Jacobs' presentation on foot health and foot pad dermatitis, one of the things that she stressed was having that dry, friable litter. Whether you're using a litter or whether you're talking about soil or grass surfaces, this is a very important concept, not just from a foot health standpoint, but from a general transmission of bacteria and disease. Spreading of excreta for drying out in the sun will certainly help reduce any risk of transmission. Actually, the sun has the UV rays from the sun has great bacterial properties, virucidal properties. Sunlight is really a disinfectant. So just spreading something out, drying it out to the dry air will certainly help. Access to new areas also aids in this. If we keep poultry in a small confined area, one of the problems is if they are excreting a lot or you have a water leak or something, that's going to put more water into that environment. So having access to new areas, a lower stocking density will certainly help this. Will help keep moisture out of that environment as it can just naturally dissipate without having a high concentration of birds put a lot more water into the environment. And then I just have here that the best environment really is a pathogen-free environment, and that's where biosecurity comes in. What you want to do is you want to, again, erect that barrier around your birds. it really almost is an invisible barrier that you have to put around your birds. And before you interact with them, or before you allow anyone or anything else to interact with them, you have to think about how best to protect and enable those birds to really have as large a pathogen-free environment as they can have. So some of the ways that we do this. New birds to the flock. If we look at commercial poultry production, the vast majority of commercial poultry do not add any new birds to their flock. This type of production is called all in, all out, and it does a couple things. One, it really limits the introduction of new pathogens to your flock. The second thing that it does is younger birds naturally are more susceptible to most of our pathogens than older birds are. So you can have a flock, an older flock that is perfectly healthy, and you can introduce a young animal to this flock, or a young bird to this flock, and that young bird can become sick. It's not anything that you've done wrong. It's just where these birds are in their immunodevelopment is different. That adult bird can handle more of a pathogen load than that younger bird can. But obviously from a small flock standpoint, a lot of times we are adding birds to our flock, and we have to remember a couple important things when we do this. Only purchase poultry from reliable, certified, disease-free sources that have records of appropriate vaccinations. USDA lists participants by state. Generally, you want to avoid swap meets. Swap meets generally do not practice good biosecurity. If you're bringing a lot of poultry together from across different areas, that's actually a perfect breeding pool for the transmission of diseases. It's sort of like sending your children to school. What do? They get exposed to diseases at school, and they bring them home and get everyone else sick. Same concept with poultry. If you bring poultry together from various areas, they are going to spread disease amongst themselves. The program that is most effective here is actually called NPIP, National Poultry Improvement Program. This is a federal program. It's voluntary, but most hatcheries or all hatcheries that you should deal with will be part of NPIP. This means they are taking specific steps to limit poultry diseases. And in a lot of cases, we've actually been able to eradicate certain diseases from commercial production using this NPIP program. So if you see that and you're working with a hatchery or a provider that is following this NPIP program, that is very much a positive outcome. If you have a disease status that is unknown in birds that you're bringing into your flock, again, that all in, all out might not be practical for you. You do want to practice some isolation when you bring these birds in. You want to give them a 2 to 4 week period that they are on your farm, they are under your control, but they are not being exposed to any birds that you currently have. And what this does is if those birds do have something that's going to manifest, it will manifest with them in isolation, and then you will not inadvertently expose your current flock to what the new flock might contain. So when we think about this from a taking care of these birds standpoint, you would always want to go to that older flock that's established that is protected first, and then after that go to the new flock that you're bringing in that are in isolation. You would never want to then go directly back to that new flock. You would want to shower, change clothes, overnight is appropriate. You would want to have dedicated footwear or dedicated clothes to deal with both of these flocks. And again, this is just to protect your established flock from inadvertently bringing anything in with this new flock. So how do diseases actually transfer into the environment. So how do pathogens move? And that's generally through vectors and fomites. And I have some listed here. Wild birds are actually a real big reservoir for disease transmission. And I'll talk about it in one of the upcoming slides a little bit more when we talk about avian influenza and how that's actually able to transfer around the world. And it does this through migratory birds, insects, and other pests. So having a good insect control program around your birds certainly will be helpful. Pets, animals that you might interact with can actually serve to transmit disease, whether it's through their fecal material and the bird's gaining access to that fecal material, or just that bird going, or that, in this case, cat going out, maybe catching a wild bird and you know, having some sort of pathogen from that wild bird that it would then track back to the domesticated birds. One of the big issues that we run into actually is the fact that through the production and selection process, we are actually selecting for birds that grow a little bit faster, that produce a few more eggs. But one of the drawbacks to that is we do that by limiting some of their natural resistance to disease. So a wild bird is going to be a little bit more resistant to disease and can spread disease into a domestic population a little bit easier. When we talk about pests, we have vermin, rats, mice, whatever you might have in the area. They sort of like poultry houses. It's warm. It's generally clean. Can be dark. Lots of chicken food. Chicken feed is pretty nutrient dense and is a great rodent attractant. Some birds during the day will go after small rodent, but generally do not have enough light to be able to function and see. They will sort of bed down and they will not be as aggressive as they are during the day. If you do have a lot of rodents around your birds, that can attract predators. Dr. Jacobs did a good job talking about predators, so I won't spend a whole lot of time. But the other big vector for disease transmission are humans and human tools. Really, when we look at it, there is a lot of transmission of disease through direct human contact, and then also taking a tool from one poultry environment and taking it into another environment. So I want to talk about the spread of disease and how widespread this actually can be. I'm going to go back to an outbreak in California in May of 2018. This actually started in Los Angeles County and spread quickly to 4 counties surrounding Los Angeles County, including Ventura, San Bernardino, and Riverside. This was an exotic Newcastle disease, and this disease actually is very, very devastating to poultry. Once this disease takes hold, you're looking at 50 to 70% mortality rates, upwards of 90% mortality rates in a lot of these birds. But the interesting thing here, and I will blame this, the vector really were the birds, but it was really a human doing. Someone took those an infected flock that had not shown any signs yet from Los Angeles County, California, and transported them to Utah County, Utah. Once they actually got to Utah, the flock that looked healthy before that got sick, and they actually moved that disease from Los Angeles all the way over to Utah. So in a matter of days, this disease moved 650 miles due to human activity and really a lack of biosecurity. You know, these birds were immediately moved into a flock with existing birds, just compounding the issue. And then I said before, I talked about avian influenza. This just this slide, I really want to talk about the avian influenza part of it. And I've got in the bottom of the slide, I've got a map of the world. And you'll see a lot of dotted lines here. These dotted lines, the straight lines, the white and the orange lines, they are all different patterns of migratory bird movement. And these circle and span the world. What I really want to point out is if we look here over Alaska, what we see is we have this Asian Pacific flyway where we have birds coming from Asia and China and moving to Alaska. While these birds are in Alaska, they actually overlap with birds that migrate down the Pacific flyway in the Americas. So coming all the way down here, covering our west coast and the west coast of Central and South America as well. There's some overlap here with what is called the Mississippi flyway, which comes over our Midwest and our heartland. And what we saw with the last large avian influenza outbreak in 2015 is we saw an avian influenza variant come from Asia, move to Alaska, come down our Pacific flyway first, and then come into that Mississippi flyway second. And you could track the disease as it moved from our Pacific Northwest into our Midwest. And this is all due to that flyway. And once it got into the Midwest, it actually became endemic. And then it was moved by a lack of biosecurity. Or I wouldn't say a lack of biosecurity, but just breaches in biosecurity. So this is critically important when we start thinking about protecting our birds, because we need to do everything we can to ensure that wild birds do not come into contact with our domesticated birds, whether that's not using bird baths or wild bird feeders around when we have poultry. If there are any nests in the area, we need to take those nests down and discourage birds from nesting and being active in that area. We don't want to have any decorative ponds around poultry. Decorative ponds will tend to draw in waterfowl. We talked earlier about feed and feed being attractant for a lot of animals coming in. Well, the same thing for wild birds. Feed should always be kept in the coop. It should be away from outside access. You want to limit the amount of wild birds that come into contact with your birds. Pest management, rodents and predators, remove their shelter. Eliminate rock piles, brush piles, tall grasses, remove trash, waste feed, fecal material, because all of these animals, whether it's rodents, snakes, reptiles, they all can carry salmonella. And that is one of the best ways that salmonella moves from flock to flock is actually through pests, whether it be reptile or rodent pests. When you're talking about interacting with your poultry, because that's an important thing, right? We don't have poultry, especially from a small flock standpoint, not to interact with them. But do it carefully. You want to make sure that you wash your hands both before, because remember, washing your hands before is actually going to protect the poultry so that you're not bringing anything in on your hands. But then also do it afterwards. Then you're protecting yourself and any other poultry that you might interact with down the road. I have on here dedicated footwear. We don't really think about it a whole lot, but our main contact with our environment is through our feet. We walk through everything. You know, either our feet or our hands are the two major contact points for most of our environmental interactions. So those are the two most important things to think about when you're thinking about biosecurity. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is clean clothing. Have dedicated clothing that you keep in maybe an antechamber or right there by where your birds are, because you might have a little bit of fecal material or something on your clothing. If that falls off, then that can very easily get into that poultry environment. And then one thing that I want to recommend to everyone is it's called downtime. You want to have at least 72 hours where you are bird or swine free, because there is transmission of disease between swine and birds as well, where you do not contact any outside birds or outside swine before you come into your poultry house. And then the same thing would be true for going from your birds to someone else's birds. You want to give that 72 hours of downtime just to allow, a lot of times what will happen is we will have viruses or bacteria that we might breathe in, and they won't infect us. They're not human pathogens, but then if we sneeze, we could then inadvertently infect someone else. And the last area that I really want to talk about is equipment and tools. This is probably the number one thing. You can't disinfect dirt. The best thing you can do when you're talking about your equipment and your tools is clean it. Just cleaning alone reduces microorganisms and pathogens by 80 to 85%. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you get all the organic material off of your equipment and your tools. You can apply all the bleach that you want to. If there's still dirt or fecal material, organic material on that tool, it's not going to work. And then for a disinfectant, after you clean something, I do recommend a disinfectant. You can use, there's several commercial disinfectants you can use, or you can use household bleach. That will work as well. That is a great disinfectant. Additionally, leaving something to dry in the sun is another great disinfectant. So I'll come back and sort of wrap up my presentation here and just ask who benefits from biosecurity. Really, at the end of the day, everyone does. So everyone needs it. And if we all do it and remember to do it correctly, everyone will benefit from biosecurity. Well, thank you. I appreciate your attention. And I think we might be done there.
Hey, thank you. Do we have any questions?
Great information. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for doing this.
If you enjoyed this video, please let us know with your questions, comments, and suggestions for other classes and videos. We can be reached at mastergardener@pwcgov.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.